Hello everyone. Thank you all for joining for this amazing July DotVVM meetup. So last month we didn't had a meetup. We had like a virtual conference. So the virtual conference was really good. We had amazing speakers including Thomas, Andrej, Daniel, Vincent, and Michael as well. So we have recorded the sessions. So if you would like to see, it's available on YouTube. And if you have any trouble accessing them, you can reach out to us and then we can share the link. And so let's start today's session. So today's meetup is with we have three amazing speakers. So we'll start with Andrej, and then it will Daniel, and then Vincent. So we'll start with Andrej. So Andrej is based out of Czech Republic, and he has been working with Giganti for past one year and 4 months. So he graduated from Charles University and he holds a master's degree in computer science. So without further ado, over to you, Andrej. You can start the session.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks for this nice introduction. And so, first of all, let me show you my slides. So, can you confirm that you see?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Okay. So, thanks everybody for tuning in. In this presentation, I'd like to talk to you about the newest release of .vvm, the 3.1 version. We will cover some most important changes that we did throughout this milestone, and then I will briefly describe what we have planned for the future milestones to come. So, .vvm 3.1, for me personally, I think this was a really exciting release that actually added a lot of new features. So let's get straight into it. The first feature that I'd like to talk about is introduction of type inference into .vvm data binding system. So if you've seen previously presentations about .vvm 3.0, you know that we added support for Lambda functions. And as we are mostly .NET developers here, you know from C# that basically in most cases in .NET, you can actually write something similar to this, as a compiler is almost always able to infer Lambda parameter types on their own. So this is something that we added to .vvm as well, so that you can write more concise and powerful expressions since .vvm 3.1 than before. And also it's nice as it's shorter and it focuses on the most important part and lets the compiler add the missing parts that it can deduce on its own. So type inference is a really nice feature that we added in this release. Another feature that is really important is that since .vvm 3.1, .vvm supports extension methods. And this works in a way that you can use import directive that you've previously used, for example, to let the binding compiler know where are some symbols, for example, enums, or if you wanted to call some static methods and so on. So import can be used right now to also look for extension methods that you can call inside your data bindings. And yeah, this is also a really nice feature. And together with the previous one, it will be pretty apparent where you can use them to leverage these capabilities in a really interesting way. And The important feature, another important feature that we added is a lot of it is support for a lot of .NET methods that are commonly used throughout various .NET code bases. So you can see some example. This was already showed previously in the previous slide, I mean, but you can also write some more complex operations. For example, you can, if you have a property customers inside your view model that is, let's say, a list of customer DTO, then you can, for example, sort them by a datetime property. And we did these translations in such a way that we want to capture the .NET behavior in JavaScript as much as possible. And I think that we are doing a pretty good job at that. So you can freely use these methods. And what methods are actually available for you? We added really a lot of those. There are a bunch of methods on the enumerable class or so-called link functions. There are also a lot of methods on string class, so string operations that you may use in data bindings. It's now all possible. Also math methods and so on. And since these methods are actually quite simple in some way, that you provide some arguments for these methods and they construct a new result for you. It doesn't really matter whether it's a value or object. It doesn't really modify anything. But we also added a bunch of methods that you can use to actually modify some properties inside your view models. So there are a lot of properties on classes like a generic list and dictionary. And from this slide, it should be also pretty apparent that dictionaries are now available and fully supported as well. You may use them inside your view models, and also we added a bunch of methods that you can use inside data bindings. And if you would like to see the whole list of supported methods and constructs, you can go and take a look at our documentation where we updated it with a lot of new information. And you can also see all of the methods that we added. So these are the link methods. These are some list operation, dictionary, string, math, and so on. And there are a lot of more that are coming. So since DotVVM 3.1, we are actually adding really many of these methods that we know developers commonly use, and we would like to see them to use them in data bindings as well. So this was a feature that we call JavaScript translations. And the next feature that I'd like to mention is string interpolation. And with string interpolation, I'm pretty sure that every developer has already encountered this issue at some point. So this is a really nice syntactic feature that can be used to generate runtime strings. And we support also some optional, more advanced features of this string interpolation feature that you may know from C#. And that is, you can specify also formatting options for individual interpolated expressions. So let's say that you want to create a string, let's say it starts with today's formatted date, then you want to place there your datetime property from your view model and have it formatted in a specific way. So yeah, this is all supported. Also, you can write there some more complex expressions and so on. So yeah, this is all supported, and I think it's a really nice addition to the framework that you can construct runtime strings in a much more nice way as compared to concatenating strings with the plus sign. So yeah, the next feature, string interpolation, also available since .vvm 3.1. And there were also other changes. For example, we added abort signal that you can use to abort postbacks. So if you know that the result will be no longer needed, you can abort it. Also, we added some, or we extended support for HTML attributes, where we added support for numeric types and booleans, because previously it only supported, in some cases, strings and collections of strings, which sorry, there is an echo there. Okay. So previously it supported only strings and collections of strings, but now we extended this support, which can be quite helpful if you want to use server rendering, as this is where this can greatly help you. So .vvm 3.1, these were the most important changes, and I would like to encourage you all to also have a look at our changelog for .vvm 3.1, as I couldn't go over all the changes, as there were a lot of them, also small improvements and bug fixes that can be quite helpful. So yeah, if you would like to know more, you can go over our release notes for this milestone. And right now, I'd like to sort of outline what's our plan for the next releases. And actually, we are working in parallel on 2 releases right now. So the next release will be .vvm 3.2, but we are also already working on the .vvm 4.0, where there are almost finished some pretty nice features. But let's start with the .vvm 3.2. So what's our plan for .vvm 3.2? We will continue with our effort of adding even more .NET methods that can be quite helpful for developers. So for example, we have already added a bunch of those from datetime, so that you can use properties like year, month, day, hour, minute, and so on from the datetime. And we also added a bunch of utility functions such as URL decode, URL encode. And we already received some feedback from users from .vvm that started to using these JavaScript translations, and they helped us to identify some methods that were missing. So we are adding a lot of those so that users can do even more with this feature. For this release, we reworked our continuous integration pipeline. So once this feature is completed, we will be using Azure functions for continuous integration, and Azure pipelines. And we are also trying to tackle a lot of issues and bugs in this release. So we'll be and are already looking at the REST API bindings, which caused some issues for a couple of users. And also we are looking right now at some low-level JavaScript API for patching view models, which can also cause right now some issues in some edge cases, and a couple of others, kind of minor issues, and a bunch of them are already prepared. So we are hoping to release .vvm 3.2 sometimes shortly. It won't be as big of a change as .vvm 3.1, as we are already working on the .vvm 4.0. And the .vvm 4.0 will be a really interesting release, as there are a lot of interesting features, such as feature that we internally call easier way to write controls, which helps users to somehow somehow use external controls inside their .vvm projects, as this was in some cases a bit harder in previous releases. So right now we have already almost finished. This change is already being beta tested on some internal projects. We are really nice with this feature, and it should be merged shortly. And I'm hoping that preview will be also released shortly after that. And this is not, of course, the only change. But it's probably the major change that will be coming in the .vvm 4.0, where we also plan to greatly improve areas such as validation that we already mentioned in previous releases, but we realized that there must be done a bit more work, and as such, it is much more suited for the next major release, which will be 4.0. And not only that, but there are a lot of more changes coming in the .vvm 4.0 as well. So yeah, this is pretty much the roadmap for the next .vvm versions. So in the following month or so, we are hoping to release .vvm 3.2, which will have these couple of features that I showed you on slides, but various bug fixes with it as well. And as I already said, we are working already in parallel on the .vvm 4.0, which will introduce some really interesting features that we are really happy about and would like our users to use them as soon as possible as well. So yeah, I think at this point, this is all from me from this presentation. So I'd like to thank you. And I'd like to mention that if you have, of course, any questions, feel free to ask now or on GitHub, Gitter, or other platforms that the .vvm community is present on. So yeah, once again, thank you very much. And I'm giving back presentation.
Thank you, Andrej. That was really good to know about 3.1 and 3.2. So can you just answer like when can we expect release of 3.2? I mean the alpha version.
Sorry, I didn't really hear.
Yeah, can you just tell us the date for release of 3.2 alpha version?
Yeah, 3.2. We are hoping to release it in a month or so. So we are hoping that somewhere around August and September, and yeah, I think that I think that it should be somewhere around that time, because much work has been already done, and we are right now mostly working on the bug fixes that I mentioned. So it should be coming really shortly.
Okay, that's nice to know. If anyone have any questions, feel free to ask now. Meanwhile, I will just move my slide to Daniel's presentation. And thanks, Andrej, once again. And hopefully we can see you in next meetups.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be here for sure.
All right, cool. Thank you. All right, so our next speaker is Daniel, our very own. And Daniel is our developer advocate, and he has been with us for like more than a year. Daniel is very active with Dev2, C# Corner, and then also on our Medium blog. So Daniel has been working lately on .vvm in action. So earlier he also presented a similar topic. So for this time he will be presenting a web application for translation of language by text and speech. So over to you, Daniel.
Hey, thank you, Abdul, for the introduction, and hello, ahoy, hola to everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to be here on this occasion to present you the .vvm in action to talk about a web application for translation of languages by text and speak to. And in this case, let me share my screen. I hope you are watching this, right? Okay. Uh, to start, I want to show you as a first point the demo to introduce you this topic, and then talk about the web application in general part. So I'm going to start presenting this web application. On this section, we can record our voice for then uh, reproduce in this section, and then have the opportunity to translate our voice, that is to interpret that voice to text, speak to text, and then translate it to another language by text on this section, and then reproduce our voice translated. So let me put here translate to English to show you in a better way. Okay, and here we can have languages, uh, here languages, and input languages, in this case, for example, English, Spanish, Portuguese, Czech, Hindi. This is some examples, and a language of output. So I'm going to say something to have an example and translate it, for example, in this case, from Spanish to English. This is just an example. um, Hola a todos, es un gusto saludarles. Siempre quise hablar en español en este evento de comunidad y es un gusto saludarles a todos. Hola a todos, es un gusto saludarles. Siempre quise hablar en español en este evento de comunidad y es un gusto saludarles a todos. This is the example, and now I'm going to translate it by text and reproduce the result in voice in this section.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to greet you. I always wanted to speak in Spanish at this community event, and it is a pleasure to greet you all.
Okay, this is the functionality of this demo. And yes, I'm always wanted to speak in Spanish because it's my native language, but this is the demo in this case. Then we can try it with other examples too. And now I'm going to start the presentation with this demonstration. As we can see, this is an application to translation of languages by text and speak, and this is the translator solution. The first point in this demo, we are using Azure resources in this case to help use to translate the text, for example, and also to interpret our voice. That is, for example, we can send our voice, and that is that speech resource transcript our voice to text, and also and .NET, for example, we can have a class library to communicate with these resources with a HTTP request and get a response later on this class library. For example, in this case, for these two services on Microsoft Azure, and then have our web application in .vvm. And something interesting in this case is that, for example, to record our voice, in this case, the project have associated to audio JavaScript functionalities. And in this case, I want to comment how to have this communication with .vvm and JavaScript. For example, in this case, to have a recorded audio file and have this process. And to do that, for example, we can call JavaScript from .vvm through JS directive to have this functionality and have this communication between .vvm and JavaScript too. So in this case, the functionality is JS directive. This is a feature introduced on .vvm 3.0 some time ago. This directive and a general idea allows you to interact between .vvm controls and the JavaScript code. And in this case, the thing we need to have is functions and modules on JavaScript to have this communication. So the process or the steps we need to follow to achieve this goal in this case is, for example, or in this case, is follow the next steps. As a first point in JavaScript, we need to declare a module with functions, the functions that we need to call later. And then in ASP.NET, specifically on .vvm startup, we need to register that module, that is the location of file, the JavaScript file, to have associated in our project. Then in .vvm views or some views, we need to import this module declared on .vvm startup previously to use these functionalities. And then we need only from .vvm, for example, in views, call JavaScript functions from .vvm and use these functionalities. So this is the general idea. And now I'm going to take this opportunity to show you the code. In www root folder, I have in resources a JavaScript file. Let me open. Okay, this file. In this case, I have this class, the class app, and on this section, export this context app, this class, and this is our model to use then. And in this class app, we have some functions specifically, or the most important functions in this case is, for example, start recording and stop recording to record our voice and stop the recording too. And other functionalities on this JavaScript, but the most important on this example is start recording and stop recording on this JavaScript class to this export model. Then in our project, specifically, remember, in the .vvm startup, we need to refer to this JavaScript file. In this case, we can go to the method configure resources, and in this case, as you can see, register this resource. Specifically, for example, writing a name, for example, in this case is audio module, and the script module resource is this resource, the location of the JavaScript that is in www root and resources and script.js. This is the way that we can register this audio module, and then in our views we can refer to this configure suggest this setup and use the JavaScript functions. In this example, for example, in the views, in the default, the only thing we need to do is in this line, for example, call the JS directive specific writing the audio module, that is the name that we can specify previously, the name of our resource on this section. And then, and with that, we now call the JavaScript functionalities. On this case, the example is with buttons. The buttons call in this case, for example, when we have a click event, we can call through static commands the JS functionalities. For example, in this case, invoke directly the name of the function on JavaScript. For example, remember, start recording is the name on script functions. Here we can call it in this way, and then put other properties, or specifically on the button control. It's the same way for the stop recording in this case to invoke this JavaScript, and this is all. In JavaScript, for example, we can generate the audio file on this section. Let me show you here. To save the audio file, for example, in JavaScript, I'm calling to API save audio save, calling this API to save the file, and this API, for example, is here on save audio. This is a controller on this section to save the audio file here. And this, for the moment, this is a demo. The files are saving on this section in the www root folder. Then we can use blob storage or something like that to save these files. And that is, for example, the process to call JavaScript functions in an easy way. Thank you to the functionalities on DotVVM 3.0. And on this case, to call the JavaScript functions. And in the default view model, for example, we can associate these files for then call that community services on Azure, that is, for example, to have the speak to text process, and also the translator text by text. So this is only to call the classes that we have in this class library, speak and translator, sending, for example, on this section, the audio file. This is only, for example, the name of the file, and also in the text output, for example, calling the translator text. And finally, get the audio result on this section in this text to speak. This is an example in this case. I'm going to show you very fast how is, for example, in this case, the speak. To use these resources, we can go to Portal Azure if we have an Azure subscription. And here we just need two resources, the speak and translator. For example, in the case of translator, the only we need to do, or we need to have, is the case and endpoints. The endpoints is to call the API, in this case to translate some text, and the key, this case, that allows you to use this service. For the speak service is the same thing, the case and the endpoint too. And in our code, we need to refer to this case and also to the endpoint. The endpoint is associated with a region on Azure, and we can have these methods to have these processes, in this case, for example, to speak to text and text to speak. The source code is, I can share you then. And for the translator service is the same way. For example, to having the subscription key and the endpoint too. And this is the general process to have this web application. I'm going to the demo again to show you some examples more. I'm going to try talking, for example, from English to Czech, for example. The language, I don't know if the Czech is the pronunciation, but we can try something, saying something to prove this part. Hola. Sorry, again. Hello, this is an example to translate an English example to Czech language. This is an example. Hello, this is an example to translate an English example to Czech language. So let's try. If someone here is speaking Czech language.
Dobrý den, toto je příklad překladu anglického příkladu. Dva české jazyky.
Okay, I don't know if that's right. If something here that talking in Czech can prove that, you can mention it that. But this is the example in this case. I'm going to prove in other scenario, for example, in Hindi, other case. Hello, this is an example to translate some example to English to Hindi. Prove these functionalities on .vvm in action section. Hello, this is an example to translate some example to English to Hindi. Prove these functionalities on .vvm in action section. Okay.
हेलो, यह एक उदाहरण के लिए शिखर सम्मेलन अनुवाद तो हिंदी के लिए, अंग्रेजी के लिए उदाहरण एक कार्रवाई अनुभाग में VM पर इस कार्यक्षमता साबित कर दिया है.
Oh, very well. Abdul, what do you mean?
It's not accurate, but it's pretty much like what you wanted to say.
Oh, very well. And last,
Yeah, that's
and a
it.
last, okay. We can prove a last example. Let me refresh this page. And for example, other example to Spanish to English. And here we go. Muchas gracias. Espero que les haya gustado esta demostración en este evento súper especial de la comunidad. Cualquier cosa que necesiten, para mí siempre será un gusto poder ayudarles, así que muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Espero que les haya gustado esta demostración en este evento súper especial de la comunidad. Cualquier cosa que necesiten, para mí siempre será un gusto poder ayudarles, así que muchas gracias. Okay, I'm going to translate it.
Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration at this super special community event. Anything you need from me will always be a pleasure to be able to help you, so thank you very much.
Again, thank you, everyone. I hope you like it, and that is the demonstration in this occasion on .vvm in action. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Daniel. That was really cool. And if anyone has any questions, they can ask now. Thanks, Daniel. That was a good presentation. Thank you, Daniel, for this amazing session. I hope we can see some cool topics next meetup as well. Thank you so much for doing it again on such short notice. So our next speaker is Vincent. So our next speaker doesn't need an introduction, and Vincent is like Vincent is Microsoft's MVP, and he has been like a very active in Nigeria. And Vincent will be speaking today on implementing data streaming with gRPC in .vvm or ASP.NET Core client/server application. So over to you, Vincent. Vincent, you're on mute.
Hello?
Yeah, you're. And
Thanks for having me, and thanks for that introduction. So for this session, right, like my last session, I wanted it to be more interactive, and I would like the same thing for this session. So I would just like for everyone to open their mics and let's just have a conversation. The topic I am doing is implementing data streaming with gRPC in .NET Core and ASP.NET. But I would like also talk about how we got to gRPC, what the adoption is, and what are the advantages, because I realize that not a lot of people are very aware of it yet. I am going to share my screen now. Give me a second. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
All right, great. So data streaming with gRPC. You see, I have an introduction there from SOAP to REST to gRPC. So I just want to talk about how we got to where we are. If you've been coding for say over 5 years, you would know of the time when we use the SOAP protocol, right, which is a simple object access protocol, and it really was a way to send files over a network as XML. And then from SOAP, the internet evolved, and then SOAP worked perfectly for the need at the time. And so why did we go from SOAP to using REST? So most communication today between web servers and all of that, this is done through REST. So why did we go from SOAP to REST then if SOAP worked so well? The problem with SOAP was that we had to send every file via XML, and that XML doesn't just contain the document we need to send. So the XML will contain some metadata, it will contain the server it is coming from, it will contain the kind of object, it contained a lot of XML tags that really made the data too large. And then because of the size of the data, transmission over a network is just much slower. And so another big downside to SOAP was that you couldn't send multimedia files. So everything you had to send everything you will send via SOAP has to be condensed down to XML. And so I don't see how you would condense a video to XML or a picture or a binary file. And so as the world moved away from just websites and web services, and we started having phones, and so people want to scroll their phone and quickly see information on social media and all of that, we moved to REST. Now, what is REST? REST is not a protocol per se, like SOAP. So SOAP is a protocol, but REST is a set of architectural guidelines. So REST is a recommendation. The full meaning of REST is representational state transfer, and it is supposed to be a stateless means of transfer. So REST says, if you want to do this, I recommend that you do it like this, because then if everyone is doing it this way, everyone understands everyone. So REST is this recommendation for how to communicate. And one place you would see that recommendation is in HTTP status codes. So if I call an API that has implemented the REST pattern, and I get a 400 code back, I know immediately that something didn't work out. So depending on if I get a 404, I know immediately that there is no resource there. If I get a 200, I know that that is successful. So that is what REST stands for. REST stands for this whole, if we're all doing things like this, which work, we can understand each other better. And REST has worked well for a very long time. With REST, you can transfer any kind of data. You can push binary files because with REST, you can implement it in any way, right? You can send JSON files with REST. JSON files are really small compared to XML because they don't have the extra tags and all of that. You can send plain text. You can send basically any kind of data that we're dealing with right now over REST, and that works perfectly. But now, in my opinion, REST is about to be replaced, and a lot of people hang on a lot of people will hang on to it the same way a lot of people hung onto XML. So when you talk about the people that hung onto XML and SOAP, you would see a lot of enterprises, right? So a lot of traditional enterprise companies with a lot of legacy code insisted on using XML. The challenges they faced then was that it became harder for them to find talent because really no one wants to work on those legacy systems. It became they just couldn't interface with the rest of the internet properly, and their systems were significantly slower. So those were some of the problems that people that refused to embrace REST. Those are some of the problems they faced. Now, gRPC is the new wave. So if you're working with microservices, gRPC is recommended for your at least for your internal communication between your services. And the way gRPC is being used now, if you have a microservice architecture, it is recommended that all the communication inside of your internal network between all your services calling each other is done with REST. Then when you need to talk to a client, say a browser or a mobile app, you use regular REST over HTTP calls to do that. But before we even talk about if you should do that or not, let us even understand. So what is gRPC? We all understand what REST is because we use it. But really, what is gRPC? gRPC is a remote procedure call framework. And that statement is important, right? Remote procedure call. When we talk about a procedure, at the end of the day, it's the same. The things we call functions and methods, those same things are procedures. And when we say remote call, it means that we are calling a method from or a subroutine from a program that is over a network, really. So I have a class and I have a method in that class, right? And I can call that class from another part of my program. Except in this case, I am calling that method from a whole different system. Now this time, the difference here is that the system I am calling this method on does not know that this call is not coming from another part of the code. It is coming from a system, a whole distinct system. And really, it doesn't need to know that. The implication of that is that we can build we can build real distributed systems where we can have a program spread across different systems and machines, and they would interface with each other as if they are just calling the same network. Now you might be saying, but isn't that what we're doing with REST right now and all of that? So let's talk about some of the advantages that gRPC brings us. Now you see with REST, so you call say you call a controller or you call another system and it does some processing. What happens is it does the processing, it gets the data you want, and then it prepares that data, it serializes it to JSON, and then it gives it to you. And then when you get that data yourself as JSON, you deserialize it, and then you start to work with it. Now, gRPC sends data as binary. So there's no serializing or deserializing. You are actually sending those binary streams over the network. And this is just like you call a method and you get an object back. This is one of the most powerful features of gRPC. And because you're getting that binary data from over the network, all of that overhead of serializing and deserializing and processing headers and all of that your web server does, all of that is suddenly removed. Now you might be thinking, okay, but how many seconds does it really take to do all of those things? It might look small, but if you multiply that by the billions of requests that are flying all over the internet, or the millions of requests your web server is taking, if suddenly you're removing that whole serialization of the serialization part, you would achieve a significant reduction in your compute, just removing that whole serialization because you're using gRPC. So some of the advantages that I highlighted are the size. First of all, the size just becomes much, much smaller because you're just sending just the binary data. And then the speed, of course, if the size is smaller, then the speed is much faster. So it's easier to send smaller data. And then, but for me, the most interesting thing with gRPC is data streaming. So this idea that with the traditional REST call, if I want 2,000 records from a database and I call the service responsible for giving me that record, I have to wait for that to be processed. So I have to wait for that service to read it out of the database, probably serialize it into a list or a JSON list, and then send it to me. And then I have to wait until I am done receiving it before I start processing. But the beautiful thing with gRPC is that gRPC can start pulling the data from my database. I can start pulling the data from my database and immediately start streaming it to the service that needs it. And immediately that service starts to get it, it starts processing it immediately. So you have this connection that is open, yet I am processing this data already. So I don't have to wait until I chunk that data and send it over the network. And this doesn't happen in just one direction. With gRPC, you can get a bi-directional streaming where you're processing data from one service and sending to a different service, and then immediately the other service is sending you a response. So you have like two channels open and you're communicating in real time. Now, some people might say, that's not a big deal. You can already do that with WebSockets and the rest, but we all know how fickle WebSockets can be, especially over a network that's not very good. gRPC just really solves that problem in a unique way. That's the most interesting thing for me with gRPC. But then someone else might say, okay, all of this is cool, but gRPC is not, like I said, eventually when you need to talk to your client, you still have to go back to HTTP, and which is why I am doing this talk. It no longer has to be that way. gRPC is evolving really fast, and as of today, it is possible to actually send data into your browser, into your front-end application as gRPC, and it just gets and you can interact with it the way you would interact with JSON or something. Unfortunately, I am on a Mac now. I did a demo that is crashing, so I cannot. Please let me know if you can see the web app. I did a demo which is crashing because I cannot use a full Visual Studio here, and the Sharper is just giving me issues with .vvm. But I really wanted to show the capability of gRPC in the browser, so instead I'm using a Blazor app. I already have an application being debugged here, and I'm just going to run this app very quickly. The app is already running. I just want to clear here, and then I'm going to make a call request. So I have made this request. If I click here, just so I want to show you the data format in my browser. Look at my content type here. Content type is application/gRPC web. What this means is that this is a very simple example. I am grabbing this data from the back end, but what can happen here is that I can configure streaming so that this list can be updated in real time without using WebSockets. So every time the temperature changes, or every 2 minutes or every 2 seconds, the server just pushes that data onto the stack, and I just update all of the information here. So this is a big win over trying to. I mean, if you try to do this over WebSockets and your internet goes down, it disconnects automatically. But gRPC stays persistent. First of all, because it can work over very low. I don't know how to put it. Low bandwidth, basically. So how does this work? How, if you want to get started with gRPC, then what do you have to do? I'm going to come to the code here, and I'm just going to fold up everything. Please let me know if you can see this clearly, or I need to make it a little larger.
Yeah, I think it's seem good.
Okay, so I have a client here, and then I have a client here, I have a server here, and I have a shared project. The first thing we should look at is the shared project. So with gRPC, you need to define the format. So you need to define the format of the data you want to send, and the format of the data you want to receive, and all the methods you want to call. Remember, like I said, with gRPC, you are calling actual methods on another service. So here I have a proto file, and I have described some methods here. So I have a service called weather forecast, and then I have a method here that says I have a method here that says get weather. So this is responsible for getting the weather. I have a model here that is the weather forecast, and the first property there is a date time. The second property is a temperature in Celsius, and I have a summary, which is basically some text. So I define this model, and then I come and define another model which houses a list. So with gRPC, the way to say this is a list of something. So instead of in C#, I would say a list of objects. With gRPC, with proto files, I can say this is a repeated of weather forecast. So every time I send this back, I am actually sending the model that contains a list of this. And then I have a get weather method that basically returns a weather reply here. So after defining, and this allows different application types. So I have a C# application now. I can take this file and create this file in a Golang project or in a JavaScript project and as long as I have this file there, this is like an interface that I have to implement. So if I put this in a different programming language and I implement that interface, suddenly it can talk to the service too because they have the same methods and all of that. So after creating this file, I have to implement this methods because then what happens when you call get weather? Where's the code? So that's what we need to do now. The way to do that is that you create a class called weather service. But before you do that, C# needs to know that this is a proto file that we want to do something with gRPC here. The way to do that is to go to your CS proj. So I will say edit the CS proj, and you include this here. Basically, you include this tag here, say protobuf include weather.proto. Now, what happens is each time you build your application, it is going to auto-generate some code. I am going to try to open that code quickly so you can see. Okay, so I opened it in VS Code so I can show you the build files. I think it should be. Okay, I don't remember where the generated file is, but basically what it does is what happens here is that it auto-generates some files, but you have to create a weather service class. It auto-generates this base class. When you build your project, what happens is it auto-generates this base class for your proto file. Because again, notice that I called this weather forecast. So this is where I got this name. I don't have this base class anywhere in my project because the C# tools automatically generates it for me. And what you have to do is to create a class called, you can name it whatever you want, but you have to you have to inherit from the auto-generated file that is generated because of this proto file. The next thing you do is you have to override the method you defined here in this service. So I defined a method called getWeather. I have to come here and say, if I type override, I think I am overriding it already, so I will just comment this out and see if it will let me override it again. Okay, so you see it's now reading this file. It's reading the proto file, and now I have override get weather here, and that really is the pattern. So when you override get weather, you can define what you want to happen when this method is called, and you realize that this is not a controller, this is just a class, right? So you define what you want to happen when this method is called, and which is what I am doing here, really. And then you return a response. For here, I am returning a single response, but you can open a stream with this. So how does all of this tie together then? I'm just going to. So how does all of this tie together? So I have this in my shared project. I have a weather service that is ready to be consumed, and I have a proto file. Let's take a look at the server project. I'm going to go to my startup file, and you can enable this in any .NET Core API project, right? All you have to do is say services.gRPC, but first you have to add some NuGet packages. So you have to add gRPC.ASP.NET Core.web. You have to add gRPC.ASP.NET Core. So basically say add gRPC, and then come here and say use gRPC web. And then you have to map an endpoint to your service. So the same way you have endpoints to your controller, and the same way you have endpoints to your Razor pages, you need to map an endpoint to your server. So when someone calls this web server with the gRPC call and say, hey, I want to call this class on this method, it knows how to route to it. So that is all about our server projects, I think. So this server is basically ready to receive gRPC calls. Now the client project can be any kind of project, but for here, I was testing this with a .vvm application, but I can't debug .vvm properly in Rider because I don't have Visual Studio. So what I'm doing here is basically setting up the client. So this is how you set up a client um, in Blazor. And the way you would do this in .vvm really is to build a client, build a HTTP client, and install, you have to install the gRPC packages. So you have to install the gRPC.NET client in it, and once you install that, you're going to get the gRPC web handler, navigation manager, and gRPC channel options and all, and you're basically able to open a gRPC service. So notice I am registering this weather forecast from my shared project. I'm registering this with my dependencies. So how do you use this then? How do you call the methods? You can call it from your view. You just have to inject it. So I am injecting the class here. And then down here, I am saying, hey, call the get weather on this class I injected and save the results into this forecast. And then I am displaying the forecast here with a loop. And that really is that's as easy as it gets. And you can do a lot of interest. This is a very minimal demo, but you can do a lot of interesting things with this. And I'm just going to clear my request again, come back here. And then you see I have an application that's the content type is gRPC. gRPC is still in infancy, but there are a lot of situations where you have to maybe update the UI in real time, or you have to maintain a connection to the back end, or you need to keep pushing data, and this is a viable option to look at. That's it. I would like to hear your opinions, your what you think about gRPC or where it might go. And that's my presentation, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. It was a really good session. And if anyone have any questions, feel free to ask now. Whether me or Vincent or Andrej or Daniel. Anything about .vvm, we would be happy to answer. I guess that's it. Thank you, Vincent, for the session. I hope to see you in the next meetup as well. And thank you to all our speakers, Andrej, Daniel, and Vincent. And if you haven't subscribed to our Meetup page or WhatsApp page, please subscribe to us. So we will be sharing like more updates. And hope to see you next week. Till then, bye bye.